Good morning, and thank you for joining our Creating Secure, Simple Customer Experiences webinar in partnership with Okta. I'm just going to quickly take us through some housekeeping before I hand over to the team. So during the webinar, everybody will be muted, but you can ask any questions via the questions box on the right-hand side of the screen. We will have a Q&A at the end of the session, I believe, to answer any submitted questions. And we will be making the recording available to everybody who attended after the session. That's my bit done. So I'm going to hand over to the team at Okta. So James, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Do we want to wait another minute or so just for people to roll in and then we can begin?
We can do that.
Yeah, let's give it another minute or so and then we can begin. Okay, yeah, let's get started, and then if we do have any late joiners here, then we can always distribute as you said earlier, distribute that link out to everyone afterwards too. So thank you everyone for joining this morning. We've got a very exciting few different topics being covered here around customer identity from Okta. We've got three main speakers here actually speaking today. So I will now pass us across to the introductions for the team, and then we'll take a look at the agenda, and then we will go in from there.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, James, for passing over to me. My name is Christian Sullivan, and I am an identity specialist here at Byte. So my role sits within the security team, and our role is to assist the account managers in talking about subject matter expert areas. In this case, it is going to be customer identity. So your team today, as you can see on the screen, is James Richmond, who's an Alliances Solutions engineer from Okta, along with his colleague, Matt Bailey, who's a platform specialist and specializes in customer identity as well. So thank you all for joining us. I will be asking your questions through the webinar as we go. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to place them within the chat box and I will ask them as we go through. James, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just to skim through as to what we'll be covering today. First of all, you'll see that we're going to be looking at how we can provide a seamless user experience with the tools that are available from Okta. We'll then be passing through into how we can enhance that security, and then how we can look at the extensibility, scalability, and also the uptime availability of Okta within its customer identity platform too. And then we're finishing up with Matt giving a demonstration of the capabilities of customer identity with Okta, and then any questions and answers at the end that we could provide around those as well.
James, speaking of questions, we have our first one already, which I'm glad to see, so thank you for engaging with us. The question is, what market shifts have you seen in the last 12 months?
I mean, that's a great question to come straight off the bat. So, of course, yeah, as we've all experienced over the last year, things have changed so vastly when it came especially to e-commerce and shopping. All of those online experiences they're now being subjected to, mainly because things were closed and not available for us to go into store over the last 12 months. So things have changed massively there because of the situation we've been in. And it wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't mention COVID. So, of course, with everything that's been going on around us, all of the lockdowns, innovation has peaked massively over the last 12 months due to services having to be given online rather than in person, rather than going into a store. So to make sure that customers return to our stores to make those additional purchases and provide the experience that they require, we've had to make our providing much more seamless for them. So when they return, they're given that experience that they can sign in and not be faced with any friction, and also be able to return and complete those transactions that they want to in a very seamless way too. So that's what we've seen mainly over the last 12 months. We've seen this massive movement across that e-commerce space, but at the same time, we've also seen a huge surge in those attempted breaches and the scams that people are being faced with that are trying to defraud them. And one of which I think probably most of us here have actually experienced over the last year, not necessarily been a victim of, but have experienced it, are these new SMS messages that are being sent out, trying to actually spoof themselves as the Royal Mail, for instance, trying to get us to sign into a portal that isn't actually theirs. And a number of these challenges that organizations are now facing need to have those holes filled in when it comes to that security side of things. So we'll be looking today at how Okta can provide that seamless user experience, how we can close the gaps on the security that we need to put in place to protect our consumers and the data that we're holding on them, and ensure that they're not going to be faced with any of these problems in the future. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Matt, who's going to take us through the first section here of that seamless user experience, and look to close that question of how we can protect and provide that user experience to our end customers.
Thanks, Jimmy, and good morning to you all. So I guess before I start with the first topic about kind of user experience and how important that is, I'm going to call for kind of our first poll of the webinar. So if I could just get that launched, there we go. So as a consumer, what matters most to you while transacting online? What do you think consumers care about the most? So there's a couple of options there. So we'll leave that on for a few seconds, and then we'll see what feedback we get from the attendees. I always think these are a bit of a trick question because actually there's probably you're probably torn between a few of these as to what's actually the most important. I think that's probably. We got the results. There we go. So the results are in, and the two most popular answers that we had here was obviously about trust, security, of course, and also about frictionless experience, which is great because that's what I'm about to talk about in a bit more detail. So yeah, so if I can close that poll and we'll go back to the slides. Perfect. And I guess before I actually start the kind of content as to how Okta addresses some of the challenges here, I guess it's worth just talking about the challenges that we face when it comes to kind of authenticating and actually registering kind of users to adopt your services and products that you're selling or giving access to. And there's loads of research that's out there that shows what a key part of a user journey this part is. And some of the statistics that I can share with you, things like 1 in 3 customers say they will walk away from a brand they love after just one bad experience. And for me, that really kind of dials into the fact that how important kind of a frictionless experience for the users is so important. There's statistics that show how many people abandon a product purchase when they're faced with a registration page which is asking them for 10 fields of information. Why should I be asked to declare my my gender or my date of birth when I'm buying just a simple kind of product off the internet? And as consumers and users, we've all come to learn what's a good experience and what a bad experience is. And yes, there's always a balance, when I talk a bit later on about MFA and whether MFA should or shouldn't be part of that user journey. And yeah, you're going to have a wide spectrum of users in terms of some that are more computer savvy than others. Some people are more happy to do kind of a 2FA prompt via a text message than others. So it's a real challenge for organizations to get this right and to meet that balance of security and usability. Kind of Okta obviously tries to address the majority of these challenges when you're kind of developing a site or a service from an authentication perspective. So one of the ways that we do this is we've got a couple of options as to how Okta actually presents this to the user. And the first one that we talk about is what Okta refers to as our hosted redirects. And the most best example I can give us as to how this works is if you ever try to sign into any of the Google services, whatever you're trying to sign into from Google, whether it's your Gmail or Tree Drive or anything like that, you always go back to the same site from Google. They always redirect you to a central place that is familiar to Google users. You come to know and trust and know that that's definitely Google that you're on. And so that's the hosted redirect kind of model, which is used by some of our customers. Moving on to another solution that we have, which is our signing widget. And our signing widget is designed to enable our customers a real rapid way of getting off the ground going with a pre-built kind of widget, which doesn't require much work on the developer side to get going. So as you can see here on the right hand side, this is pretty much the entire kind of code that's needed to actually embed this within a website. And it's really easy to configure. You can see there at the top the different kind of attributes that we're actually entering in there to actually build this widget out. And the key advantage of using our widgets, as you can see there on the screen on the left hand side, is that it kind of comes with a lot of out of the box functionality that the real kind of friction and pain points that a lot of people experience. Obviously registration, multi-factor enrollment and challenges, and my biggest kind of pain point that we're all familiar with, the good old password reset and recovery. It's inevitable that your users, your customers will forget passwords. It happens all the time. But what's really important is enabling people to actually reset and recover that password in as easy and quickest way as possible, whether that's being sent a code by email or text message. Okta has that capability kind of out the box, ready to go when you kind of use the widget. But of course, the widget obviously meets most customers' use cases, but in the day of branding and customization, we have a lot of requirements around obviously creating a very customized interface. And for those customers, we, as you can see on screen here, we have obviously an API and an SDK-driven approach to grant developers the ability to build those really kind of complex and innovative kind of flows for your kind of login flow. So whatever the requirement is, whether it's something that's pre-built off the shelf and you just want to get going in a matter of hours, or you want to build something that's very granular and custom, this is where you would kind of build it out with our APIs. So that kind of covers off my kind of the seamless end user kind of experience. And yeah, I'm going to move on to enhancing security. So security is kind of a big part of.
Matt, I do beg for your pardon. I had myself on mute. We've had another question come through, and the question is how is the merger with Okta and Auth0 going to affect the number of use cases that can be addressed, and how will it affect the customer experience?
Wow, I didn't think I'd be able to get through the webinar without talking about Auth0. So yeah, really exciting news that last week Okta kind of closed the acquisition of Auth0, and both companies are super excited about the new kind of markets that we're going to address kind of together. The real strong message is that Okta with Auth0 gives customers even more choice in terms of the great kind of joint products that we'll be kind of offering together. So Okta obviously is targeting the market in a different way to how Auth0 builds things. If you're familiar with Auth0, they're very kind of developer focused. They have very granular kind of codes and control around how those sites and capability is built out. Okta has that capability, but we also have I guess a much more kind of user interfaceable kind of approach to doing some of the configuration, like password policies and signing policies. That's all driven by our UI. So the simple answer is that together we can meet even more challenges and give our customers the best of both worlds from both an Okta and an Auth0 kind of approach. So yeah, really excited to see what the next couple of years, is going to happen. One of the questions that people always ask me is that, are we getting rid of Okta? Are we getting rid of Auth0, for customer identity? And the simple answer is no. And this has come all the way from Todd, the CEO, where we're going to continue to invest in both products. They're addressing two completely different kind of markets and challenges. So yeah, both products are going to be around for the foreseeable future, and we're going to develop something great together. Answer your question there, Christian?
Perfectly. Thank you, Matt.
No worries. So thanks for the question as well, whoever kind of submitted that. So enhancing security and multi-factor. I could do a whole webinar in itself around security and multi-factor and the challenges that customers kind of face. So moving on to the first slide. So multi-factor in CIAM is a real interesting kind of conversation point, and I touched upon this earlier on in terms of should you require multi-factor or not, and that's a big question to put out there and to talk through. So before you even actually start to look at multi-factor, it's do you actually need it, and what kind of end user experience are you going to be giving, with it or with it turned off? And of course, I'd go to the most extreme example, and I talk about banking and say, of course, banking use cases. Of course, you're going to expect, some level of multi-factor or 2FA in addition to your username and password when you're signing in to your bank account. But then on the flip side, if you're signing into a simple service, I'm going to choose Netflix, top of mind. When I'm signing into to Netflix, if you're being asked to provide actually any credentials, but in particular kind of multi-factor credentials every time you sign into Netflix, that's going to give a real bad kind of end user experience. So once again, it's a balance of risk, and how the impact of enabling multi-factor would affect your end user experience. And so when you kind of decided upon multi-factor, obviously there's lots of different ways to achieve it. And we've got these kind of three kind of circles here about knowledge, possession, and biometric. Obviously each one has obviously pros and cons, which I'll talk about in the next one in terms of levels of assurance. Obviously Okta covers all of these kind of requirements, whether it's biometric with your fingerprint or Face ID, all the way to the more common ones that you see on a day-to-day basis that kind of Jimmy kind of mentioned earlier on about kind of getting an SMS message. So getting a 6-digit code via SMS has been around for a while, and it's pretty much the go-to for customers. And one trait that I can share with you is in terms of what some of our customers are doing is actually giving people the option to opt in or opt out of multi-factor. So rather than kind of enforce it on your users, you're basically encouraging people to use multi-factor, and giving them the choice to increase their security if they want to kind of protect their account in more detail. So I mentioned kind of these levels of assurance. So we're going to kind of move from left to right here in terms of kind of the level of assurance from a multi-factor perspective, whether we believe that it is who we say it is. So of course, passwords are always a very weak link in terms of authenticating a user. No matter how complex we try and make password policies, you must use 8 digits, you must use 10 digits, they must be alpha, they must be numeric, they must have a symbol in there. Also, humans are by nature going to take the easiest routes to that. So if you start with asking for a password and then you say you must have a password with a number in it, the odds are they're going to put the number 1 after the password. That's just humans for you, and that's the majority of what people would do. Fairly similar, if you ask for a symbol, the odds are someone's going to put an exclamation mark, on the end of that password. And hackers, fraudsters, are very familiar with the patterns that people use for passwords. So this is why obviously passwords are always going to be a point of contention in terms of how secure passwords are, which is why multi-factor becomes more and more important, certainly for more sensitive kind of operations. So obviously I mentioned kind of passwords and SMS, and as you look at this levels of assurance, of course, when you get to your top end on there on the right, kind of biometrics, fingerprints, Face ID, very difficult for a fraudster to be able to get their hands on that kind of information and be able to spoof a system. But of course, you know, something like Face ID and fingerprints, obviously it's not available on all systems, all computers and all phones and things like that have obviously different capability. So once again, it's finding something that works for all users, not necessarily, you know, everybody that has an iPhone can use Face ID. You've got to meet the capabilities of all the users, which is why a lot of people continue to use SMS with an OTP push for multi-factor. So moving aside from multi-factor, the other real kind of key point about Okta is actually about protecting the entire kind of ecosystem that Okta is there to do. And you see here, there's a lot of different types of attacks, lots of different you know, like the types of bad actors that we face on a day-to-day basis. So within Okta, we have our threats kind of insights kind of products, and its whole design is about protecting you know, from attacks before it even gets to the point of asking for a username and password. And Okta being a true cloud platform on AWS, we see a lot of data from around the world. You know, we ingest a lot of data from other systems to be able to understand, you know, those IP addresses which are commonly used for, you know, phishing or credential stuffing, and we're blocking that at the kind of router level, as I'll show you on the next slide. And so what we're trying to do is trying to protect our instance, our Okta, from those known kind of bad actors in the world, which means that kind of our customers are protected kind of at source. And that's kind of demonstrated kind of here. And you can see here, you know, moving from left to right, you've got global blacklisting of IP addresses, utilizing kind of threat insights to protect, you know, those instances even further. And then we get to the actual authentication point, and Okta has an adaptive MFA concept where we can actually start to be clever about the data or the person that's trying to authenticate. So what I mean by that is that we can start to have a look at who is authenticating, where are they authenticating from, and very simpler, you know, we're trying to reduce that threat vector. And the best example I can give of this is that, you know, if you're offering a product or a service which is only utilized in the United Kingdom, that's where all your customers are, and that's the normal behavior of your customers. What you can do is to disable access to that platform from every IP address other than ones originating in the United Kingdom. So that means that if someone tries to authenticate from the USA, from Russia, from, you know, Iran, from any of those countries around the world, they would not be able to do that. So once again, just trying to reduce the common attacks that we see on a day-to-day basis. And this gets even more kind of the capability is quite extensive. So behavior is another one. You know, has this device been seen before? You know, which is a really important trait to understand the risk level of somebody. You know, if this device has been used, the same device has been used to log in for the last 20 attempts, then you pretty much know that it's the same user that is trying to do that. However, if this is an unknown device that has suddenly popped up on the radar that you haven't seen before, you can then start to understand the risk level and decide to, okay, this person might require at that point in time to prompt for multi-factor to try and make sure it definitely is the person who we think it is and it's not an attack. So Okta takes a real strong kind of look at security. It's a real focus point of what we do. Like I said, bolstering capability with multi-factor, but also taking a wider look at trying to reduce the actual attack before it even gets to the critical kind of parts.
So Matt, I have another question that has come through, or James, this might be one directed at you. And the question is, are you seeing customers use their existing homegrown IAM implementations? And the follow-up question is, what are the pros and cons of this approach?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I think the simple answer to that is yes, there are quite a lot of homegrown solutions out there that have been used in the last 5-10 years. As we've gone past in the last few years, especially in the last year, we've seen a lot of organizations and enormous growth in the customer identity area, triggered by a massive boom in e-commerce and the increase in legislation that's been injected. Huge innovation in this area around the actual capabilities of customer identity solutions has triggered organizations to move from these homegrown solutions, which have taken quite an amount of management from their perspective in terms of resources required to keep them up to date, to protect their users and the data they're storing, but also in terms of the functionality they provide as well. So it took a lot of investment from the organization, not just time, but resources, and a lot of the time having to continually build upon the solutions they've had in the past to start again because of the way things have changed. And I think, as I said earlier, as things have changed over the last 5 years, we have seen a huge amount of shift towards solutions like that Okta offers, for instance, and also triggered by the capabilities in workforce. Okta, well known for its workforce capabilities, has focused immensely in its sign offering over the last 5 years. And even with our acquisition of Auth0 last week, which was completed, we're now able to offer and provide industry-leading integrations and capabilities to boost the success of organizations and give them the service that they want to give to their own customers. And I think the pros and cons of this, if we were to look at it from a perspective of homegrown solutions against solutions that are provided, such as Okta, is when it comes to those homegrown solutions, the management of the solution, the coding and the scripting that has to be brought together is a huge resource that has to be thrown at it. And that's before we look at the trust element, the trust that we need to put in place to make sure that our customer data is protected and that it's handled correctly, especially with the large increase in legislation. And then we've got the scaling of the business too. We've seen organizations grow massively over the last year, and they need to ensure that customers are provided the capability of actually accessing that service at all times. Because if we suddenly go from 10,000 users to 1 million users, can your authentication system that you've built yourself cope with that amount of authentications? And that leads very nicely onto the pros of a solution like Okta, whereby it's completely configurable as to how you would want it to look from a customization point of view. It's got that easy scalability. So if you did go from 10,000 users overnight to 1 million users or 1 million customers, you've got that reassurance that it can cope with that. The solution is built for millions of users across the world. And if your organization grows vastly overnight, we can guarantee that we will be fine in providing that service, and your end users will continue to receive that fantastic service that you provided up until now. So I hope that answers your question there, Christian, whoever asked that.
It's very insightful, Jimmy. Thank you very much.
No worries. So the next section, I think that kind of leads very nicely on to the next section of what we'll be covering today. And that's around the extensibility, the scalability, and the actual service and platform that Okta provides here. And the first thing I want to take a look at is what we've provided over the last 5 years is a 99.998% uptime average that we've given to our end customers. And we know that one of the most important things that the service can provide is the ability for it to be accessed at all times. It's crucial that a service like ours, Okta, provides and is faced with zero downtime, because downtime means lost revenue at the end of the day. We need to ensure that your customers are provided the best possible service. So therefore, you need to have a platform that backs up your product or service behind it too. And because we've achieved that 99.998% uptime over the last 5 years, that doesn't mean we haven't been doing weekly releases. That doesn't mean we haven't been doing frequent patches and additional updates to it. If anything, we've been doing them more than ever to ensure that we're providing the best possible service to our end customers that are using the customer identity platform, and ensuring that we're meeting these new security certifications, continually innovating on the latest AWS capabilities, because that is where our service is hosted, and ensuring that we are able to provide that scale for our customers if, as we said earlier, they were to go up from 10,000 users to 1 million users overnight. And that was seen with a number of our customers around the world over the last 12 months where this actually did occur. Now, on top of this, of course, performance, scalability, innovation isn't the only thing that we need to focus on when it comes to those customer identity solutions. The next biggest factor is being able to provide and integrate with all of those ecosystem applications that you may be using within your organization, maybe providing to your end customers. We need to provide you as an end customer the ability to integrate with all of those applications and services that you may be providing from third parties to your customers. And we can provide this with our extensive integration library, which actually includes over 7,000 integrations out of the box at present, and gives you the ability to very easily integrate with any of those third-party applications that you want to provide seamless integration with from your platform that you're providing to your end customers. And we can build on top of this with further capability using Okta workflows. So what actually is Okta workflows? I hear you all shout. What it is it gives you further existing integrations, as you can see here, with applications you may be already integrating with from third parties, but also gives you the capability of having a no-code approach here to deep granular provisioning, giving you that process and automation, providing a tailored experience for all of your end customers, no matter what service they may be getting from you, without the need to maintain code. So giving you that no-code approach here. And out of the box, there are a number of different things that are available to you as a customer. We have a number of templates and pre-built flows that you can use out of the box straight away to configure, to give you an advantage with the integration with those applications, get rid of those old scripts that maybe you were having to throw resources at before with maintaining. But all of this can give you the capability of working with pretty much any application out there if there's an API. So we can give you the capability of actually calling APIs out there. So having that integration with workflows with that no-code approach gives you that more advanced capability when provisioning or even working with those applications. We'll see a couple of use cases right now as to how this can actually be applied. So let's see one of these. This one here is more a B2B use case, but very much applies to those B2C and B2E use cases as well. And it gives you the capability of giving a unique experience to any of those identities and a tailored experience, very much as we can see here. And as we can see in this workflow, it very much works. And if you're familiar with the application that you can use on mobile devices out there, it's if this then that, it very much works on the same basis of that. It allows you to complete a flow based on when a certain event happens. So we can trigger a flow here based on an event. In this case, a vendor does a self-service registration for your portal that maybe you're providing to your customers as well. And based on the logic and conditions that we can implement here, we can determine the course of action over the flow. So in this case, are they on an approved whitelist? If they are, then we can do this. And that's where we provision the accounts downstream to the downstream tool, and ensure that if they are an inactive user for a certain period of time later on, that we deprovision their account. So we can continually automate all of the functionality that may have been done manually before, ensuring that your end users are given that experience that they require and that they expect. And if we look at this further with actually a B2C use case, we can see here that this is slightly different and slightly more tailored for those customers out there that maybe need to provide proof of ID for a service that they are getting. So particularly in banking, for instance. So from this perspective, we can see here that maybe a new customer goes through the self-service registration for joining as a customer to gain access to the service. And with this, they need to prove who they are. So if they're a new user, if they haven't provided any ID any proof of identification in the past, then we can use external services out there, such as Evident, something we integrate with out of the box, gives you the capability of, without any code, any scripting, we can use the integrations available from workflows to enable you to actually initiate an ID proof check on this particular user based on the information they have provided. And when this returns with the result, whether this proves that they are the user who they say they are, then we can verify that they are who they say they are. And we can do that final action of do that here. And that's where we add them, or actually assign them, a local banker and can provide them that additional service that they paid for in the first place, but did require that ID proofing check. So you can see here, we've got a number of use cases that we can cover off here. We can have that automation in place to cover off what may have been a manual process in the past and maybe quite stringent and quite long-winded to complete, and show you here how it can be done in four easy steps and make that seamless for your end users in terms of the experience that they're getting. Now, to look here at a particular use case as where this has actually been applied, you can see here an excellent success story that we have implemented Okta's customer identity solution with in the past. And this is Standard Life Aberdeen. The challenge they were facing is they wanted to enhance their end user experience for a new portal that they were building to provide added functionality to their end customers. And with this, it was going to be an online service, an application that they wanted to provide here to their end customers. The way they solved this was they went with Okta's customer identity solution, whereby we could give them the capability to firstly allow their end customers to automate a lot of that manual process that was completed before in the way of password resets, being able to reset their login credentials to allow them to gain access again if they had forgotten these, but also enhance security around how they access their account in the first place. So giving them that additional layer of MFA later on. But also, the main reason they wanted to put this in place was to give their end customers that seamless experience, the much better experience that they could have ever have asked for, and allow Standard Life to actually give a more tailored customer experience from themselves in the form of helping their customers in the long run. And that's what's been achieved here with the implementation of Okta's customer identity. And that leads really nicely into what we're going to be going into next with Matt. Matt's going to be giving you a demonstration of how Okta can actually be implemented, the main use cases that can be very quickly applied, and the time to value that can be seen here. So I'm going to throw that over to Matt now, who's going to give you that overview and show you how easy it is to actually implement Okta in the first place.
Thanks, Jimmy. So yes, if I could just go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. Hopefully you can see my screen. So yes, I guess this is the favorite part of my job, really. Actually showing you the products in an example that we built here, and actually how some of that theory and logic that we've discussed, myself and Jimmy, kind of actually comes together in a product. So as you can see here, this is the off-the-shelf kind of username and password fields that we've all come to see and love when accessing some kind of resource online. And so this is the signing widget that I mentioned earlier on. And one thing that I didn't mention actually is the signing widget can be extended to include, social authentication. So you can say down here, I have a login with Facebook kind of option. And that, for certain customers, for certain scenarios, makes obviously a lot of sense. Rather than creating another identity, another username and password for that user to remember, you can actually start to leverage kind of an existing identity source, such as Facebook or Apple ID or Google, all of those kind of existing accounts that people have. So yes, that's an interesting kind of shift I've started to see for some of our customers. And very interestingly, I had a conversation with a university recently who obviously for years and years were creating separate university identities, and they were obviously talking through this exact concept. The majority of their students are turning up with an existing Facebook account or an Apple account, and they were trying to determine if that was if they needed to create separate identities or they could just leverage what people already had. So yeah, so really interesting to see where social authentication is going from a like I said, a source of identity. So like I said, the signing widget has lots of great capability. If I click on create account here, this is a very, very simple self-service registration capability. It's entering first names, last names, email address, and a password. In here, I can actually include what language I want to use for my registration, and I can then go ahead and kind of register that. And what will happen in this situation here, and I've already taken this step obviously about an hour ago, is that you get an email that's sent out to the user to validate that email address. So you can see here, this is obviously bytes.demo that I spun up on Mailinator, and obviously this can all be customized via Okta. And very simply, if I clicked on the activate Atco Flowers, what would happen is that it would actually go and activate my account to validate who I am. So this can all be branded and customized, and you can change the whole look and feel of that registration email. So if I just go ahead now and obviously log in as bytes.demo, so nothing fancy here. This is obviously just a username and password that I have defined, and I have now successfully authenticated kind of into this demo portal. So this demo portal obviously has a few capabilities that I can certainly talk through. obviously what we have here is, the personal settings page. So this is where you could come in here and update my first name, my last name, and my address. And actually what happens is that within Okta, we have something we call universal directory, which effectively is just a big directory full of attributes. So that's where I'm storing people's addresses, people's favorite ice cream, any kind of attribute that you might want to be storing for that user is held within that universal directory. And what we're doing here, we're utilizing Okta's APIs to obviously update that information. So I could obviously change my company, my title, and hit save, and that will be updated kind of in real time in the Okta Universal Directory. Having a look at some of the other things in here, you can see here that this account actually has an option to enable strong authentication, or in what more commonly referred to as multi-factor. As you can see here, this is what this fictional company decided to do, is that opt-in multi-factor option. So I could come in here, I could enable kind of MFA, and the next time I try to authenticate, it's going to give me the options of what to enroll to provide that multi-factor, whether that's SMS or email, any of those kind of multi-factor kind of options that have been configured for this organization. Obviously, some other attributes in here that we can tweak and change, which country obviously I'm part of, because this is an auction site here. So this is utilizing an AWS backend, an API to pull this information through, and it's a concept of being able to bid for an auction. So I could come in here and click on bid, and that would then kind of bid on an item that I want to purchase. Now, what we haven't really talked about so far with Okta is the authorization side of Okta. So you've got authentication, which we've discussed quite a lot, actually validating an identity and proving it is me, that it's actually logging into a service. The other side of Okta is how we can handle the authorization. What is that person allowed to do once they've got access to a site? And so in this auction scenario, we have a concept of a trial account. A trial account can log in and can view the information, but if I try and bid on an auction, it's going to fail because I'm only a trial account. And I'm not really going to kind of delve too deep on this world of authorization, because it's quite a deep kind of concept about how Okta does API access management. But the high level is that Okta is minting tokens, minting dot tokens, and obviously within that token we can add claims and scopes as to what somebody can do within an application. So obviously Okta is that control mechanism to say, great, you've authenticated, but can you read, can you write, can you bid, can you bid in the US, can you bid in the UK? So we can obviously mint that token in a variety of ways to actually give people that concept as to what they can and can't do within the sites. So that's kind of, I guess, the end of the demonstration. Like the main focus of that was to show you, how easy it is to start to create this authentication layer with the kind of configuration that you want. I deliberately also haven't showed you the Okta kind of back end. Obviously, that's something else that will take longer than a kind of 5-10 minutes to show you, because obviously there is so much capability and functionality. But yeah, of course, if you're interested in Okta and want to find out more about this demonstration or other things, then I'm more than happy to have a conversation about that. So yeah, so I guess I'm going to throw this back to Christian. Any more questions for me, Christian?
So just the one that I can see, Matt,
okay.
and it is, how long does it take to deploy Okta SIAM capabilities?
I guess I could probably answer that with how long's a piece of string. Obviously, the beauty of I guess my job, my role is that I work from everything from the world's largest organizations in the banking space to a startup which actually doesn't have any customers yet, and obviously the requirements are going to be completely different across all industries. But I guess the answer that I can kind of say to that is that Okta has all the bells and whistles to meet kind of customers' needs, and like I said, we have the off-the-shelf capability with the widget, which means that and anyone can challenge me on this. I could spin up a website in an hour or so with Okta providing the authentication with any of the SDKs that we have which obviously makes a lot of saves a lot of time, should we say, in terms of actually implementing something. But on the flip side, we could obviously I've had deep, long architectural kind of conversations, which actually went over a number of months as to how Okta can be architected for multi-tenancy. So it is a bit of every customer is unique, but we can generally meet the balance as to what somebody actually wants to do. A big part of, or a big challenge that a lot of customers have, of course, is migration, whether that's from an on-premise legacy system, or a competitor product, and that's something that obviously is always going to be under scrutiny. It's always going to be a pain point as to how the best way to handle that is. And we've got a few tools up our sleeve. There's probably, off the top of my head, probably about 4 or 5 different migration routes that people take, depending on can we get the passwords? Are they hashed? Aren't they hashed? Are they in a bcrypt? There's all lots of kind of scenarios that we have to run through. But our ideal goal is to be able to migrate system from one identity stack to our identity stack without the user even knowing. That's the kind of holy grail as to what Okta can do, and we've done that successfully. So the user is kind of unaware that anything changes. But of course, that's very much dependent on the system that we're integrating or replacing. Sometimes it takes a bit longer than that because we have to use an inline hook, which basically means we sit in the middle of a transaction, and every time somebody successfully logs in, we take a copy of that password and store it within Okta. And then over a period of a month or so, we can actually gather everyone's passwords with an inline hook. So yeah, so a lot of great kind of solutions that we have to help people with migration, because it is the last thing that us as consumers want to do is that all of a sudden my favorite kind of media has changed identity providers, which means I have to go and reset my password. There'd be nothing worse than getting an email saying you must change your password, because in reality the moment that anybody gets that email, the first thing that people think is that, oh, that means that somebody has breached from a security perspective, and the reason I'm being asked to change that password is because there's a security threat. And as I mentioned right at the start, people's perceptions of security and experience is a key part of people continuing to use your service. So yeah, we're trying to avoid any of those kinds of emails being sent to make it as so yeah, so it's a long answer to a short question there, Christian, but yeah, it basically depends on the scenario. But yeah, people have done this in a week. Some people have done it in 6 months. It very much depends.
Well, thank you, Matt. You've covered all the bases there, and we can only find out once we have the conversation with the end user. So thank you very much. So just before we wrap up, James, you're going to present right on cue our last slide for us. So what is next? So over the next 48 hours, I will be in contact with you. Don't worry, I won't be doing any hard selling. I will leave that to your account manager, but we are always keen to hear your feedback here at Bytes to see what you thought of the webinar, if we could have changed anything, and indeed what you thought of the solution. So my contact details, James's and Matt's, are all on the screen. So if you do have any questions, please do reach out. Otherwise, you'll hear from me in the next 2 days. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to speaking.
Thank you, Brom.
Thanks, everyone.